Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are back once again with our weekly Bond reviews, and we can say it is weekly now, officially starting today with Goldfinger. We have hit the third James Bond film, the 1964 film directed by Guy Hamilton, and arguably probably the most important James Bond film. It's certainly in the legacy, the history, and of course that's what we're talking about as well. We are doing these week to week, but we will probably mention how this film changed everything really for Bond. I think we kind of alluded to this the previous weeks with Dr. No and From Russia with Love, that Goldfinger really is the one where they got that formula down, and they have been sticking to that formula for however many films now, 21 other films after this one, and it's still going strong. So this is going to be a roundtable discussion. We're going to go into it. Obviously, we're going to be sharing our stories of the first time that we watched these films and our experiences with it, but there's a lot to unpack with this one, definitely. But before we do, over to George with socials.
Absolutely, guys. As this is one of the big ones, of course, arguably the biggest one, we want your thoughts on this film, the legacy of this film, because if there are people that think this is overhyped because it's held in such high esteem, do comment that opinion if you dare. That's really emphasized there. Of course, no, we're not going to bite you for opinions, not all of them. However, if you like our videos, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Obviously, we do a lot of these. We're 3 films in. We've got 20, as Chris said, 21 more to go, and a new release, and maybe a couple of other Bond videos near sort of September, October time. So keep on out. And if you are completely new or you've popped through, get us up on our social medias where we talk about what videos are next, what's coming up, which is Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy. And we have a link to the TeePublic store in the description below where we do have some James Bond Cinema Savvy tops as well, which we can now purchase. But this is Bond. This is the gang. I'm going to really quickly bring up the schedule because I'm really excited. We're halfway through the first photo. There are 4 photos, so we're hardly really in it. But any excuse to bring that up, of course, Thunderball coming next week and a couple of others after. But Goldfinger is there a film? Because I'm going to jump in with the first time I saw this because I don't have a definitive memory. I remember being at my grandparents' house very little, and I just have this image of him talking to somebody on the balcony, and the next thing she was gold. And I was probably 5, 6, 7. Like when you've got very like limited images in your head of memory. I remember when eventually I watched it, which I think it would have been like ITV. It was way before the box set. I remember watching it on ITV, the adverts, and it was like mentally images coming back to me watching it for that first time. And I didn't really take it in. And I think as you get a bit older, you pick up film more. I think it was on my big Bond marathon in 2012. That was when I sat down like, this is the real deal. This is why it has that reputation. And I wouldn't say it's the right age for it because I easily was, but it was when you're marathoning it, you can look at Bond in a completely different perspective.
And I think it jumps out from a marathon as well. Like I always keep saying this, like the last time that I watched these films was when we were attempting to do this way back when Spectre came out, and I was trying to watch them all in the lead up to it. Only got about halfway, so I didn't get far, but especially in that initial first lineup of films, I think Goldfinger was the one where something just clicked, and I think it's definitely the most entertaining of the Connery ones, for sure. Probably my favorite, and you're right, because I think it is the reputation of this film and its iconography as well, because there's so much that this film gets right, and we'll talk about the formula later, but the very ridiculous plot, but like the colorful villains and the memorable villains, the henchmen, the theme, it's everything. And you're right that the gold painted woman on the bed, I remember seeing that. I don't know if it was some kind of like Bond documentary or greatest films of all time or something, but when it keeps cutting to like iconic moments from the film, that was the one that always stuck with me. So I don't know if you can sort of go into Goldfinger with that preconceived notion of seeing all these things before, and that kind of influences your opinion with it as well. But there's just so much that was introduced into this film. Now, I will sort of be offering comparisons to the previous 2 that were reviewed, because I think that I prefer sort of like the gentleman spy aspects of Dr. No, and certainly From Russia with Love. But I think just as a film, this one breezes through. It's less than 2 hours, and we talked about the other ones, how the pacing's quite slow, especially From Russia with Love. And I enjoy From Russia with Love. Go and check out our review for that if you haven't seen it already. But you are kind of treading water until you get to that third act, whereas this one, it's just solid all the way through. The pacing's so good in this film.
Yeah, it's one of those where I don't even know where to start, in truth. You are right. I think those other ones are a slog, and not to be horrible. Obviously I've not read the book, so maybe it's a disadvantage viewpoint, but you wouldn't think this one was a book. I know, but obviously it was an adaptation. But if you look at those other ones as well, a really big thing, which we'll probably get into later on, is that Spectre is, hinted at in Dr. No, is in From Russia with Love, it is in Thunderball and For Your Eyes Only and Diamonds Are Forever and On Majestic Service, but it is absent from this film, which is a really big thing for me because I think this makes it stand out by itself. Not saying this is like a Marvel team-up film, but it sort of allowed itself to be its own story. And I think even from I know we had a pre-credit scene in the last film, but even in this one, as you said, you get the action. It's less spy, it's more action-orientated. And from the amazing duck moment, and you've got some iconic moments, the car chases in this one, I think this is everything. And at the end of the video, we're going to talk about the Bond film and what this did for the film, but I think, with this, we have to talk about probably one of the most iconic images. It's the golden body. It's there on the poster. I think everyone can tie that image, and it still makes no sense. He just painted a god because he felt like it and because he could, which is cool. I get that. But even go back, that's like the first 5 minutes, and you've already got like one of the most sort of important moments in Bond's history when you look at all that stuff, and it's really fascinating. And I think a really good standpoint is to talk about Bond himself, Sean Connery, because I think this is his best performance. Maybe not to the book or to this, but I feel that if I'm looking at the definitive James Bond Sean Connery performance, it's Goldfinger, it's the Aston Martin, which we'll talk about properly later on. There's so many moments, the guns, the gadgets, all of it. This is that definitive look and feel of a Bond film. And I think Sean Connery, if you look at his performance, we'll get to Thunderball next week because you'll see signs of it coming, but you start to notice the drop-off, and maybe because it was 3 films done back-to-back at this point, 1962, 3 and 4, then we got this one, and this was that sort of like peak moment of it. It was not building to this, but that sort of thing wasn't around the 60s, but this was, I think, the defining moment where Bond became the product or the character that the world know and love.
I think product is I don't know if product's the right word for it, but this was the first blockbuster, I would say, in the Bond franchise. It had the combined budget of Dr. No and From Russia with Love. This had a budget of $3 million. And I get the impression that, and I might be wrong about this, but with it being set in America, they were trying to push more towards that American audience and try and bring on more viewership. Not to say that it was struggling for viewership or anything like that with the previous 2 movies, but the previous 2 films were so distinctly British, and it feels like they were trying to, they touched on Jamaica with the other one. They've done sort of like Russia and, was it Turkey? I think it was Istanbul or whatever it was. And then this one, it's like America, get that audience there. So it definitely feels more of a polished film, I would say, in terms of like a blockbuster type film. But you're right. I mean, Connery's tremendous, and maybe it is because it still was early into his tenure of Bond. But this sort of surprised me last week when I was looking at the release dates for these things, expecting at least a 2-year gap between the films. They were cranking these out every single year. I mean, these very much were almost like the Marvel films back in the day, not to the degree where you get 3 films a year or anything, but just how quickly they turn them around. And he is tremendous in this, and it is everything. I'd say that if this is easily one of sort of like the most defining James Bond films for everything in terms of its imagery of that James Bond character. I do like elements of him from the previous 2 movies, as I mentioned, and he does feel, I don't know if he feels wildly different in this film, but I think it's just the film that he's in overall feels very different from the previous 2. Yeah. I keep mentioning the word blockbuster, but that's absolutely what it feels like. But he feels like that almost like Superman kind of character in this unstoppable, badass kind of spy. And actually, I think that I was reading sort of about this film that I don't know if it was the director or the screenwriter. They wanted to give him really sort of like overpowered bad guys so that Bond didn't feel quite as much like a superhero like he did in the previous 2. I actually think you get the reverse effect when you have almost like these comic book villains and how he takes them out and the creative ways that he finds a way to get out of situations. It almost feels more like comic booky to me, like he's a comic book character come to life.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful segue into the villains, because this became the Bond trope that we'll get to Odd Job and the henchman, but this over the top villain and this dastardly plan and this villainous base with all this pure evil and everything. And there was only ever one man that could stop him. So you are right. He feels more like a super in this than the others. And I think we started with Goldfinger, or at Goldfinger. Took me years to realize that he was the king from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And even crazier fact, he is dubbed in this film as well.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. See, I'm confused by that recently. I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, I believe there's a video online, and you can only ever hear his original voice in the trailer. It wasn't actually that bad. It's slightly harder to hear, but it feels more evil. So I don't know if he dubbed it himself or if they hired somebody else to do it. But I love Goldfinger. I don't know what it is about him. I don't know if it's those weird shorts or the fact he's sort of cheating to win a game of cards. I don't know where to start with him. I think I wouldn't say he's the most iconic villain. I know that's a big thing to say when there's 24 films, but in terms of, that villainous name being the title of the film and the fact that it's that sort of comic book thing, isn't it? Like Goldfinger loves gold, and it's that very much that superhero type thing that you get a lot of. And I think as far as villains go, he is one of the best ones. He's very much a caricature of those sort of comics at the time and things like that, sort of 60s. I always think of Batman 66 when you have that like such overzealous villain and what's going to be this sort of persona with him and what's he attached to and what makes him who he is. And it is got, and I think it's stunning, but I think the performance is great as a villain. I don't want to sit here and say I feel threatened by him, but I love the fact that he's just so, it's a Bond trope, isn't it? He's just so evil. He's evil. You don't need to really do much else to him. We just want to know what his big master plan is, and we will get it at the end of the film. And I absolutely love him. I don't know if it's because I'm thinking about watching Chitty Chitty Bang Bang on VHS as well now, but I've got a craving to watch it.
See, here's where I have to admit that I've never actually seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, so I'm gonna have to. It's on my list. The list. Let's not even get into the list. I love Goldfinger in this, and I've mentioned this in the previous two. I think Austin Powers, just shining strong with this with Goldmember. Just I love gold and just seeing everything. But I love that they keep that sort of iconography with him as well. Like it's sort of in the set dressing, it's in the props, it's in everything. He literally has a gold obsession, but he's a completely over-the-top villain, and I love everything about it. These are the kind of Bond villains that I like. These are the Bond villains that I want. And you look before this as well, you mentioned that he's not sort of an imposing bad guy, really. You don't sort of fear him in any way. And that's kind of the point, I think. You always have your head honcho, who's your main villain, but the one that is imposing is the henchman. And I know that we had henchmen last time. We actually kind of had a few henchmen from Russia with Love. But this is where it all comes into it. And both the main villain and the henchman are completely colourful, ridiculous characters. And they always have a gimmick. And I think that's the key. If you have a villain with a gimmick, that shines through. And to some degree, we had Dr. No, and I think all the elements were there for a great Bond villain. We mentioned the name. It's catchy. It's memorable. It's the name of the goddamn film. He has the gimmick with the hands. But there was something about it, and I don't know if it was because he comes into it so late into that film or whether it's something to do with the performance. I don't really know, but he kind of gets lost in the minutiae of all the other Bond films, I would say, as a Bond villain with Dr. No. But Goldfinger doesn't have that problem at all in the slightest. He's introduced very early on into the film. And actually, some of my favorite scenes in the film, I know I'm jumping ahead to best moments, that interplay and that playing off each other that Bond has with him, where he's cheating at the game of, is it like Jim Rummy or something he's playing, and he's got his henchwoman sort of like aiding him from afar from the building. The golf tournament as well, where they bet each other, was it like £5,000 or something for some Nazi gold? Those are some of my favorite scenes, and I love how they're just sort of like tittle-tattling against each other. He gets a suitably over-the-top death as well. I will say that. Completely ridiculous. The effects don't hold up at all in that scene, and I did almost burst out laughing in that final scene. But he's a memorable villain, and even some of the set pieces, it is that monologuing bad guy. Before I kill you, Mr. Bond, I'm going to strap you to this completely over-the-top contraption with the laser beam going up at the middle. Very memorable. Even the traps in this one are memorable. You've seen that parodied and replicated in so many other films after that in the situation.
Yeah, it's one thing I always think of is I don't know if you're familiar with the Moby James Bond song. I don't know if you've ever heard it. So it's not a Bond theme from a film. So Mum was a massive Moby fan, and growing up with this Bond CD had all the themes on. I think up till World's Not Enough, and there was this weird Moby remix. And Moby did a remix of the Bond theme. It's so late 90s, early 90s. It's unbelievable, but I always remember it had the Goldfinger line, well, you expect me to talk, no, Miss Bond, I expect you to die. And it was like the big kickstart of the song. So the first time I saw this film, I remember being like blown away. I was like, oh my God, it's the scene from the songs from and the laser. And do check that out for anyone that hasn't seen it before. But I think this is where the stuff you're banging about Goldfinger is that you like those weirder moments that when they start playing golf, Bond thinks he's spying on him the entire time. But we know from the get-go he's not, because he knows exactly who Bond is. He chose to let him live. Oddjob was there helping him. And I love that interplay that Bond's trying to spy. He's just like, Mr. Bond, you know why I'm here. We've already met once before. We don't want to do it again. I'll never see you again. Bye. And I love that he is very smart, although he does get it wrong at the very end. He's a very smart guy. And I think I even noticed this time that he mentions that he's been working on his plan for 15 years, which is incredible. And I love the plan, and we'll get to that in a bit. But you are right. When you spoke about it reminds me of wrestling. Back in the day when it was wrestling, it's these cartoon characters, this over the top. The faces are going to be as good as they get, the villains as bad as they get, and who's their tag team partner? It's that perfect dynamic, and I love Oddjob. And I didn't know until recently that the actor that played him was also like a professional wrestler in Japan. But
you
as
can
far
see
as
it. You can definitely see it.
And what I love about him is that they don't. And this doesn't sound horrible. You would expect a Bond film to do like racial stereotypes and things like that. It doesn't. He is treated as a henchman, not this weird Korean guy that's popped over. And they don't do like blatant. I don't think they even do many stereotypes in truth. Not that I'm saying I want to see it, but I love that Oddjob is treated as this physical presence that is a henchman. He doesn't speak unless he's chanting that weird. Was it like hup? He's doing something like that when they're playing golf. I don't know if that's a golf term or a Korean term, but I loved all of the Oddjob stuff with him. But it's the hat, man. Like how could you make a bowling hat look cool? It's I know you didn't get to play GoldenEye in 64, but on multiplayer mode you'd be Oddjob and you got to throw that hat and kill someone, and it was like a one-shot kill. You see a hat spinning at you, you're going to go. And I love seeing him. And as you mentioned, the golf course, all the build-up, when you get that great line, he like launches the hat at the statue, and it's like he's like I own. It's like Bruce Wayne. It's like I own the place. I love Oddjob in it. I think as far as henchman goes, not just setting the benchmark, but by the time we wrap up this series, I think he'll be the top two. I think it depends what you classify as a henchman and what you don't, but there's always been two standouts, I think, in James Bond's history. But Oddjob is phenomenal. I absolutely love him.
I think we've probably got the same two. We're talking Oddjob and Jaws, right? Are they
Jaws,
yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about it as you were talking there. I was trying to think sort of like, I know I haven't seen every Bond film, but I was shuffling around in my head as to which would be the best henchman. And I think it has to go to Oddjob for me. It's everything. Again, it's the gimmick. It's what I mentioned. It's the hat, the look, everything. And I seem to remember as well, I talked about those TV shows that I probably watched as a kid and just sort of absorbed things. It was the gold painted woman and it was the statue shot of Oddjob. It's always the clips that they would show from this film. And he's incredible. And I think that you need that. Again, it's the formula. You need that sort of physically imposing bad guy. And I love that he barely says anything. And you're right, they don't go into stereotypes, which they could very easily have done in 64. There's no scenes where he's talking in pidgin English or anything like that. He is just played completely straight. And it's brilliant. And even like the final showdown with him plays out very much like a wrestling match. I will say that I don't think it's as well choreographed as the fight scene previously from Russia with Love. I don't know if it's the angles, how it's filmed, how it's covered. I don't know. But I love the way that he's taken out. And I guess this is, I'll throw in the pun now. Why not? We're on it. There are two villains that are taken out in this film by electrocution. And you've got the first one, which is probably the best pun in the film, isn't it? I did roll my eyes at it, but that's part of the charm of the one-liners in Bond. Shocking, positively shocking. And then Oddjob gets taken out with electrocution. I love how creative how he gets taken out in that final bit, though, with the hat. So yeah, full marks for me for Oddjob. I love him, and I haven't played the video game that you're talking about, although I absolutely should. And again, final Austin Powers mention of this review. I swear, guys, Random Task, who throws his shoe in International Man of Mystery, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I think with Austin Powers, I'd love to. Maybe when this is done, maybe we should all do a phase at like every 8 we do an Austin Powers film. That'd be incredible, but. You have to look at Bond as a license. And this is completely off topic, but the fact they had no issue with that, I know that parody law is under the same thing, but Eon could shut down Austin Powers if they really wanted them to, but they got to do 3 of them and maybe a 4th. So it's classic and saying, but I think with the Oddjob stuff, the final fight with him is great. It's the moment those wires come, he's probably going to get electrocuted because it's just a very basic film thing. There's a weapon there, it's in the camera shot, it's going to get used at some point, and I always forget, is he going to electrocute him as he runs towards him? Absolutely not. You get the amazing, one of the weirdest moments, which was when Bond realizes he's got the hat and Oddjob just shits himself. I don't know why it's so funny, but it always is. And he's doing these sort of wrestling maneuvers, isn't he? When he's trying to bow down and figure out where he's going to go, and the hat throws abysmal. But the electrocution itself is incredible. I know it sounds horrible to say, but it's a classic. You know, what makes these Bond villains as iconic as they are is how over the top their deaths normally are. You know, not that they're trying to outdo each other, but it's so boring to get. I think there's very few Bond films where the villain is just shot in cold blood. I think it's such a boring thing to say. It's how creatively can they do the things like that. And I think both Oddjob and Goldfinger, Oddjob's got it better. It's just so much better. And but Bond can't beat him in a fist fight, so just get rid of him another way. And I just love what they're doing. I think the funniest thing with it is just before that, when Bond's trying to walk around with he's got like the bomb attached to him on the handcuff, and he's like trying to walk around with this giant tray. Mm-hmm. I think it's little moments like that that make the build up to it funnier. But what a perfect duo. And again, it's them getting it right in the 60s and then realizing this villain worked, this henchman worked, and we're now going to make that a thing for the progressive future for so many films. Even if it's not a physically imposing henchman, I always think of Golden. I'm not going to say too much, but, you know, if people that I'm invincible. Some genius. I think it's Alan Cumming that plays that. Genius things, and that's a good surprise. You'll love that one, Pat. Yeah, and I think one thing we need to talk about. Let's skip to it soon. We speak about iconic moments. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna skip the Bond girls the moment. We're gonna go straight to the Bond theme because we were talking before.
Yeah,
you can't really say the word Goldfinger without the linger, and that was not an intentional pun. You know, when I was typing the description, we put like a Bond theme line on each one, and I was kind of there like, I just want to like slap bang 10 E's for the end of Goldfinger. Because it doesn't feel right reading it, because in your head it's playing the song. But once again, you want to talk about setting standards. Shirley Bassey's Bond theme. Yeah. And I guess getting the audio Bond theme at the start of the film is also a big trope. But what a song. Parodied, done many times. The Alan Partridge one is a classic. Racing to Goldfinger on the Motorway. But what an absolute tune. I absolutely love it.
I mean, this is Bond to me. Now, I will say it's probably not my favorite Bond theme, and we might do a ranking video at some point much later down the line before we get to it, but I think it's definitely the most iconic, and I think it's kind of what we said with Dr. No, where we said it's not our favorite, but just the certain scenes and the respect that we hold for it, and I think that's why a lot of people come back to this, not just because it is a great song. It absolutely is. It is almost sort of like the first official Bond song. We did have Matt Monro with From Russia with Love, but this one is sort of, I think it goes down to the opening title sequence as well. Just found out it was designed by graphic artist Robert Brownjohn and just transformed Bond. That opening now has become the ultimate trope of the Bond films. I will say we kind of got elements of it. We did get elements of it in Dr. No and From Russia with Love, with like the dancing silhouettes and everything, but this is where it was really refined. You get clips from the previous films as well. It was almost giving me Spider-Man vibes, like the Raimi trilogy, where it shows you like this is what happened before. But what a soundtrack. And I think that John Barry had full control over the soundtrack on this one, with the actual Bond theme and the music, and that's the perfect combination as well. It's how you get that Goldfinger riff that constantly keeps coming into the soundtrack. It's everything you want from a Bond theme. It's sort of sultry, it's a bit sleazy, and it's just, you know, with the brass in there, the brass just going absolutely 10 to the dozen on this song. And obviously Shirley Bassey, who for many people, probably myself included, is the voice of Bond. In her first of 3 Bond themes, I want to say. I know she attempted to get a 4th one in for Quantum of Solace, wasn't successful. This, Diamonds Are Forever, and Moonraker, all up there as one of my favorite Bond themes easily. It's just tremendous. And it captured that sound of now what we come to expect from a James Bond film. And every time, with every Bond film that comes out, you wait with bated breath as, oh God, what's the Bond theme like this time? And you can either have the highest highs of a Chris Cornell, or you have the lowest lows of a oh God, what's his name? Writings
Sam
on the
Smith.
Wall. Sam Smith, thank you. Yeah, we'll get to that at a later date though. But yeah.
Yeah, and what I'll say, just to add to that, I know we're on the wrong view. The Skyfall theme, that is one of the only Bond themes people can sit there and compare it to Shirley Bassey, and that's more down to how good Adele was. But that, you know, it's the voice of Bond. If you've got a pinnacle scale of, was this the best pre-credits Bond sequence? Okay, you're not going to compare it to this one, because I'm just not going to give away the best one that there is. But when you have those moments, most of the Bond formula, you're going to go to Goldfinger, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Because one thing I would say, this is a strange one. One thing I'd say, that one of the weakest parts of the film, and I don't think it is a weak part of the film, but in terms of looking at the 24 ahead or 21 ahead, 3 behind, the Bond girls. Okay, let's just get out of it. Pussy galore. To this day, no one ever knows why and how. Even back then, they didn't know how that name passed through all to be a thing. It was like Pussy's Flying Circus as well. It's kind of that. I wonder if they were sort of poking it because we spoke really well, and from I think maybe more Dr. No at the time. These films are really edgy. They're not now. They're not to us. Generations have passed since then. But, you know, back in the early 60s, having someone, like, as you said, in like a bikini was probably a massive hurrah, or a woman with a knife and stuff. And you didn't have that. And in this one, obviously, we get that name as well, which is, I'd imagine back then, turned heads, because it would today. And it definitely would have back then. So let's go, though. I really don't look at her as a Bond girl. I know she is. I think because she comes into it for the last half hour, maybe, it's a really interesting take, because obviously we get the build up with Jill, who obviously is maybe the most iconic Bond girl based off her fate. Is it the first Bond girl to get kills?
I guess so, yeah.
Well. Yeah, because that becomes a trope in itself, whether that's good or bad for people at home. But we get two dead Bond girls, actually. There's 3 in this one. I don't want to say they're the weakest. They do drive the plot, the death of Jill, which is a very weird thing to say, because you kind of forget about her once her sister also dies. But I don't mind them. I think they're mainly here for the gore painted body, but Pussy Gore, we just don't get enough of her to me. Like, I do enjoy from what the scenes we get of her. And I think, you know, I love the fact that she's got her team. They're doing the flying, and they do the big twist at the end that, you know, she had a change of heart. They didn't find the note. They did it in a different way, and I loved that stuff. But I think because she enters it so late, it's really hard for me to sit there and be like, I love seeing this character.
Yeah, I struggle with the Bond girls in this one as well, because, well, there are kind of 3 of them, and it's difficult to kind of define. You have to go, I mean, she's second build, at least on Wikipedia anyway, Pussy Galore. Honor Blackman, who was in the Avengers, not the Avengers as we come to know it now, the old school British Avengers. She was cast probably off the fame of that and her character from that. It's that moment again. It's like the individual moments of this film as well. It's like, my name is Pussy Galore, I must be dreaming. Like, that scene, so iconic in itself, and I think it's all down to the name, isn't it? And it is tongue in cheek, and I think it is meant to be that way. Like when you see her flying circus, and they're all these, like, you know, identical height blonde supermodels in the jumpsuits, it almost felt like a Carry On movie. It almost felt like I was watching a film from, you know, that kind of generation. It's fine. I just come to expect that from the early Bond films, and I do think that gives them a charm above even the recent ones, because you probably couldn't get away with that. Well, absolutely you couldn't get away with that now, but I think that's just so distinctly Bond about it. But I do think it suffers from not so much as like a Bond girl identity crisis, but I kind of had this with, I think it was Skyfall, where you have a Bond girl in there, but she kind of gets off like a quarter of the way through. I don't even think she makes it halfway through. And then you don't get anything. So I guess you count her as the Bond girl in that film, but it just felt sort of like that awkward in between. Is there another one who comes in? It's been ages since I've seen Skyfall. It's Belushi, isn't it? I can't remember her name. In Rome. She's like in it for a handful of scenes. Then doesn't he meet someone else when he goes to... That's
Spectre, when he gets with the dead widow after he's killed her husband.
Oh, I'm thinking of that. Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
and then she goes like, that's it. And then she just doesn't come back. It's like, oh, like she lived. That not something that sounds like a bad thing, but it's like most Bond girls get offed. But then again, you got... the Craig ones have their fair share. It becomes... I think this is what I'm saying. This becomes one of the big tropes that, well, very often Bond films after this point have 2 Bond girls. One of them will either die or be a villain. Most of them tend to go that way, and some of the others will stay loyal and whatnot. But yeah, it's very different this one. But some of those more recent ones are a bit weirder. Skyfall does have the one getting killed though. That's when she gets headshotted. Not in a fun way, but that's why Javier Bardem makes that entire film.
That was a good moment. But that was a great moment in that film. We'll get to that one when we get to it.
Yeah, but, I'm excited. I'm excited for Skyfall. I know you're not. But
I think with this one, it's just you know, you do have that great introduction with the gold paint. Actually, completely fictional death as well. Was it like skin suffocation or anything? But everyone just thought it sounded legit. That no one batted an eye. I think they do kind of swing it where it's like, this could be feasible. It's like you have to leave a little base at the spine or something so the skin can breathe, and they didn't this time around. And then you think they're setting up some kind of revenge plot line with the sister, and then that ultimately kind of doesn't really go anywhere, and she's off. And then it's just Pussy Galore now, and she's basically a henchwoman. But there's not much that really links her into the plot, you know, that sort of makes her a memorable... I guess she's memorable from the name and the name alone, but in the actual context of the film, I do think that considering it's meant to be one of the best Bond films, and I do stand by that, I think it is, that is definitely sort of like the weakest aspect of all the different factors that go into to make a Bond film.
Yeah, exactly. I think you are right. It's more famous by name and actions. It's just fine it, but she's just not in it enough to be on that level of your Vespers and the ones like that. But I'm going to talk about another character who is without a doubt one of the greatest characters in the history of these Bond films. It's of course the Aston Martin DB5.
Greatest product placement in movie history, perhaps.
I think so. You know, growing up way before. I mean, Aston Martin's only been in F1 since I've watched it this year. Growing up, the Aston Martin was synonymous with James Bond. And I know the Brosnan one, there's for some reason a couple of BMWs. And yes, I've got my problems. We'll get to that. Well, it's not enough. But the definitive image is Sean Connery rocking up with that DB5. Or it's Sean Connery in the mountains of Scotland in that black and white photo with the DB5. Or it's Daniel Craig with the DB5. Or it's Pierce Brosnan with the DB5. And a lot of the others got to drive Aston Martins. It is I think Roger Morris was the Lotus of Spirit. But, oh my... I mean, you know me. I like my F1, but I'm not big on cars. I couldn't tell you the horsepower of the car I drive or anything like that. But what I've always said, and what many Bond fans have said, you know, if you had an unlimited bank account and you like, I don't know, some billionaire like Elon Musk, there'd just be Aston Martin DB5s or it'd be Aston Martin. If I was ever going to even win a lottery and not enough to win Aston Martin, and you have to buy a house and other things, it's an Aston Martin I'll buy. Obviously not a DB5. And I think when you have to look at this, you look at the iconic image of that car. We haven't even spoken about the fact it's got gadgets, that it has the number plates that swivel around, that it has the oil slick or the machine guns and the bulletproof windows, which was probably massive back then and is nothing now. My car doesn't have it, but any relatively important person's car does. And I just think, you know, if to introduce that car in this one, and I will counter it as well, the Rolls-Royce Phantom that Goldfinger drives is as perfect for his character as the DB5 is for Bond. But you have to just sit there and, you know, this is where it started again. Goldfinger does it once more, introduces something that sticks with us, and it's just that iconic image. I don't care how bad the car could be to drive; it's synonymous with James Bond. I could talk a lot more about Aston Martin and James Bond. Luckily, we've got 20 more films to do.
I was going to say, well, out of the two of us, you are definitely sort of like the bigger car guy out of the two of us. I don't know cars, but I do know this car to visually look at it. Like I'd say, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying about the whole comic booky feel of it. I'm going to compare it to like Batman, like, you know, that with a car with loads of gadgets, that superhero kind of like character. You've got James Bond, you've got Batman. And the car is so synonymous with that character. You know, I don't want to turn this into a Batman review, but with Batman as a character, there's so many aspects that go into it to make a good cinematic depiction of that character, including the Batmobile. It's like, oh, what's the Batmobile going to look like this time? And I guess that's different because it changes from film to film, but this is the constant. And I was reading that in the novel, apparently Bond drives a DB Mark III, which he considered England's most sophisticated car, which definitely sounds like a James Bond thing to say. But yeah, I mean, this was at the time, I guess was it just a cool car? Like, was it a popular car like at the time? And they said, oh, let's just sign a deal and get this into the movie, because it very much seems that way. But if it was that, if they did just base it off because it was in the novel it was a DB Mark III, and it's like, well, this is a DB5, it's the more souped up version of the car that we've got now, let's just get it in the film as a homage to the book. It has stayed the test of time. And even in the new Bond film that we've got now with the Gatling guns, where he does like the spin, I believe that's that exact same car as well. And no matter, 2021 with a new Bond film coming out, it is still that car from this 1964 movie. And I think it just adds that sort of, not regal quality, but that British sort of as I mentioned, sophistication to the character, and that he would keep using that car.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm looking here actually, because that's the question I never asked myself. Is this more famous because of Bond or the race? I think they go hand in hand with each other. I think Ian Fleming probably had the DB3 written in the book, and they probably thought, okay, he has Aston Martin. I'm just reading that one of the special effects supervisors approached the producers and the Aston Martins. To be fair as well, they're based not far from us. I think they're in Gaydon, which is like in the county we live in, not that close to us, but still pretty close. And it's this synonymous image with the car industry. And I think, so I'm not massive on cars, but I know bits of it because of Formula One and sort of the fact we went to Cov Uni, we both did. And, or they pride themselves in engineering because of how important our region is to that. And I think Aston Martin is probably seen as the pinnacle of British engineering, without sounding up ourselves and too patriotic, that you had, you know, Ferrari in Italy and you had all this, and what was our supercar? It's the Aston Martin, and I think they go hand in hand with each other, don't they? I'm sure it would have been famous without Bond, but I don't think it's a specific model of a car every single person could tell you by looking at it. You know, I think if someone asked me to name a Ferrari from the 60s, I don't know. Name an Aston Martin from the 60s, DB5. And everyone knows it's because of James Bond. So I think they make each other. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that they are so important. And not that I'm the biggest advocate of the Royals, but I think doesn't Prince Charles have like a casual DB5? And I remember for William's wedding, they're going to let him drive out in it, and it wasn't silver. And I was like, disgusting. It's like, why would you have that much power and not have a silver DB5? You know, they're not run out of money. That's a conversation for another time. But
I bet they're glad they signed that deal, though, with these films. Like, not that they would be short of money, but these films have got to help at least getting the image out there, definitely.
And it's like now there's an F1 Aston Martin team guess who was in their introductory video to unveil the car to the world? Daniel Craig. I don't know if it's what's more mental is I don't know if it's compulsory or not. Like, I would love to be a fan where, like, does he sign up to be Bond, knowing that you'll be synonymous with driving Aston Martins for the future? Because it's
probably in the clause, isn't it? Like the fine.
I was going to say, like, I know that celebrities have to like Kanye West can't wear Nikes because of his Adidas shoes, and I bet Michael Jordan's the same. And it's bizarre, but I wonder if it's like must only be seen in an Aston Martin in public. Because Daniel Craig isn't too far away from here, but I've not seen any DB5s in truth. However, that being said, I'm going to really quickly carry on talking about cars, but not the actual just basis of the car now. I love the car chase. I know it's very much a product of its time, but you know, we kind of laughed about the rear projection they had in From Russia with Love, and I've had to get proper action scenes with the car. It's got the gadgets, it's got the things to do it, and without me bringing up working there again, one of the highlights of working at Pinewood was the fact that the shop we'd get our food from was on the street they filmed the chase at, and it's called Goldfinger Avenue.
That's I remember.
And it's amazing because all I can imagine is this juice and sign above it, which is the shop. And then whenever I watch Goldfinger, it's like, oh my God, I always forget, like, you know, this was just them driving around the studio at nighttime, and shit like that happens. And that's the best way to make things like it. But I absolutely adore that. I always have to bring it up because every time I watch Goldfinger, I was like, it's the scene. I used to walk there every day. But Goldfinger, what a film, what a legacy.
And we were talking about that as well, like sort of off camera as well, weren't we, about the fact that they've kept all the names the same there from these films. I think that's definitely a big, you know, of course it's a huge part of its history, of that studio's history, and I'm glad they are sort of staying true to that tradition of it. And the car chase itself, it's a tremendous scene. Love the ejector seat. That's always great to see. And I like how Bond's foiled as well with the mirror at the end. I thought that was really creative down the street where he smashes into the wall. It's a great scene. I think what makes it great is that there are clearly probably better car chases in the James Bond franchise as a whole, but I think it's just with, as you mentioned, Connery and that car. It doesn't matter how the car chase is filmed. It's just that image alone. I think that definitely elevates the scene.
Yeah, and I think it's the first. I mean, I know there's a kind of chase in the first one. It's really weird what's next. You know, there's that random car that blows up off the cliff, but I think this is when you get, you know, the supercar chase. And you know, I wouldn't even say. I mean, yeah, sorry, Craig just when he had it in Spectre courted, but it became this big thing where the henchman would eventually get a supercar as well, and you have the supercars racing and fighting. And I don't think you can get that without this film. You know, it could have been any car they did that, but because they did it with the expensive car, the supercar, that then makes it its own thing moving forward. So I think we had to get the Aston Martin chat out of the way because it basically is a character in these films. I know that in the Craig films, it's a literal part of his character now, which I actually have mad respect for them for. Gadget-wise, we always talk about these because one thing I will say, sorry, going back to the car, we said last time that when Q comes in, the beauty of Q as a character is that we know that everything he introduces is going to get a payoff. He's not going to give you 30 seconds to talk about a gadget or a moment or something that's not going to get a payoff. You mentioned the ejector seat. Yeah, if he said ejector, you must be joking and never uses it. That would be like, okay, there was no need for that. But because we know we're going to get the ejector seat, it's that subconscious saying, this is the moment for it's going to happen. And I love all the Q stuff, but I think you get the classic Q line. It's like, you know, I never joke about my work, Mr. Bond. I think that's a classic line in itself and epitomizes Q as a character. But the whole build-up, and I know that his only other gadget is basically the I was going to say UAV. It's not called a G.
Oh yeah, it's like a tracking device, doesn't it? Yeah, the sat nav. Yeah.
And it's like, it's, you know, not to be horrible. It's when that little red dot pings and it's like a map of Europe. Like, so yeah, we get it. Like back then, that was radical, and it probably didn't really become a thing till the 90s in truth. But it's amazing just seeing that technology again as the years have gone by evolve.
I think the gadgets to this degree as well, where they are mostly ridiculous, you know, obviously not the sat nav thing, which we know is very much a thing now, but the car itself. And I get the impression that like people in the writer's room were just sort of like throwing out different things, like what the car could have, like how over the top can we make this. But I did read that this was the first Bond film that introduced the gadgets. And I guess in terms of sort of like the over the top respect, absolutely. But I would say it was From Russia with Love that introduced the gadgets, at least in some way. The case, the knife that was attached to it, that still is a gadget for me. Now, it is relatively low-key compared to this film and certainly the ones we get after this. But I think it just helps play into that trope as well. And I guess speaking of tropes, we can sort of talk more about that formula now. We've already talked about a lot of the elements from this as well. Really quickly, just a quick casting thing I want to mention as well, because we've talked about casting changes, and Lord knows this isn't the last time that the Bond franchise does switch out characters. We get Felix again, and I couldn't remember him in this film. You got Felix Leiter, this time played by, it's either Seklinder or Checklinder. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but apparently Jack Lord, who played him in Dr. No, he wanted second billing credit and a huge pay rise. And usually when you go to your demands, when you have a Coleman Reese moment from Dark Knight shouting the odds, you're going to get canned or you're going to get recast. And that's exactly what happened to him. So doesn't really do much. I think Felix for me, and maybe this is because I think Casino Royale was the first James Bond film I watched, that I just think of Felix from that movie, because he does have a lot more to do in that film than he does in any of these ones.
Yeah, this is one of my gripes. Is Felix Leiter is a character he pops up across many years, but you are right. I think because the first time I saw him was Casino Royale, and he felt like a character that you thought he was. You find that he's a spy as well. He's just not this American guy that he's mates with. That he was a spy in his own right, doing the same thing. And I think that's more down to like how great I think Jeffrey Wright is, and he's very underused in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. In this one, it's just like it could have been anybody playing anyone in that, and you don't miss him from Dr. No, and it's that, oh, my pal James, yeah, him, and it's like sort of cringe dialogue. And what you mentioned, he wants to be second build. I was like, really? Like over Goldfinger?
It was like a Batman and Robin kind of situation. You wanted them both going on this adventure together. Like, it's never going to happen in a James Bond film, and it shouldn't happen.
Yeah, he should be happy he just got to film scenes with Sean Connery again. That's probably the highlight of that. But no, it's very strange that, and you know, it says, oh, he's a replaceable character now. Modern day, that was Jeffrey Wright. It's like we've got a new Felix Leiter for No Time to Die. I think a lot of people would be gutted because I think with Bond you get the supporting characters that if they don't appear in one film, they can pop up in the next, and you find of that. And a lot of them can be replaceable, but not anymore. And I think when someone puts a stamp on something well enough, it becomes its own thing, and you want it to stay that way. But you were not missed. And I think the weird American subplot was one of the... I know the whole thing's a red herring for them to build up to Pussy Galore betraying Goldfinger and not the fact they found it. But I didn't really care for the little story. I was kind of hoping they got killed in truth.
Oh, yeah, same here. It's just another thing that's thrown into the movie, but I did want to mention it with the casting change, and as I say, we'll definitely get that when we get to Blofeld, but I guess that kind of fits in with his character anyway, but we're not there yet. But we need to talk about the formula. I want to talk a little bit, because we mentioned earlier that we talk about it. I want to talk about Goldfinger's plan. It's amazing. I love his plan now. I had a problem with this in From Russia with Love, and maybe this is just because I'm getting older now and slightly more senile. We talked about how meandering that plot is, and just there's so much going on, and double, triple crosses and everything. It's difficult. Just keep it nice and simple. This is nice and simple. This is simple enough for me to understand with Goldfinger. I didn't need to read the wiki plot afterwards. I got it from the first viewing perfectly. I love his plan, and apparently they changed it from the book. In the book, it's the 7th book in the franchise, I think, Goldfinger. I think they wanted to do Thunderball, but I think there was a rights issue at the time, and they, for whatever reason, they couldn't get to it. In the book, I think he does steal. His plan is just to steal all the gold out of Fort Knox, and I think there was a plot hole that people complained about, even from the book, saying that it would take like 2 weeks or something to steal all of the gold out of there, or some ridiculous kind of time frame that it would take to do it. But I love his plan in this one, how, and I guess, 1964, probably very much contemporary of the time, the whole like atomic bomb, nuclear bomb kind of scares and everything going on with China. He wants to irradiate the gold so that when it's in circulation, his completely unirradiated gold will go up in value. It's such a simple premise. He just wants money. He's just a businessman. He's like Lex Luthor. He's just, he wants land. He wants money. He loves gold. And it's a simple enough premise. It's completely ridiculous, but I think that's why it works. And you're just completely on board with it. So yeah, and I guess that is kind of a trope. It's been ages since I've seen all the other Bond films, but all of them tend to have, or at least the memorable ones, have a completely over the top ridiculous thing. I will say one thing that I thought would come into it is the laser that he has, because he mentions, and maybe it's hyperbole, that this laser can put a spot on the moon. And I'm like, well, surely if it can do that from Earth, like this would like hit the board that it's like cutting up and just ignite into flames, something that powerful. But the laser never comes back again. But he does have a golden gun, and he's not the man with the golden gun. That will come later. That's Scaramanga. But actually, Guy Hamilton did direct that film. I was looking at the Bond films that he did. He directed 4, obviously Goldfinger, Diamonds Are Forever, which isn't good. And then he did Live and Let Die and Man with a Golden Gun, which are probably 2 of the best. So I guess he redeemed himself after that.
Yeah, it's... sorry, I was trying to think of any other films he directed, but I think it was only those 4 I can remember. What I wanted to say with the plan, I think it's stunning, and it's so simple. Because he's been obsessed with gold, he's called Goldfinger, he loves gold, he kills people with gold. Any common person, anyone watching this for the first time thinks, yeah, he's going to... Of course, he wants to steal the gold from Fort Knox, and that's Bond's approach. And I love the fact that, to make him sound smarter, and it is a lot smarter, actually, he just wants their gold to be damaged, pin it on the Koreans. Therefore, he is basically the Golden Empire. And it's quite cunning. And I'm not going to say about many Bond villains' plans, because a lot of them are, but a lot of them are also stupid. But this is genius from the... Oh, look, it's see-through gas that no one can see coming that will knock them out of sleep for 2 days. And all of that stuff I just thought was so much fun. But I think what you get a bit of, which is the only few times we see Bond spying in this, is leading up to the laser scene where, he hears in passing the words Operation...
Oh, Jesus.
Dynamo. That's
no, I'm going to find that.
You know what I mean. He says it as a
Grand
code
Slam.
word. It's like
Grand Slam, that's it.
And he's like, you can't afford to not think of not told other people. And I thought, spies have to be smart. People don't think about them because they can be very dumb in these films. But a spy ultimately has to be smart, and it shows also how smart Goldfinger is. He knows he's right. He knows that he can't risk the chance that he is bluffing after all. And I love that stuff. I think the laser is amazing. I think probably at the time it was probably this big deal. I imagine back then, someone saying a laser is probably the equivalent of a nuke now in terms of filmmaking, like for stakes. Like he might get cut by a laser, whereas like we can make lasers at home with our own filming cameras. Back then, they definitely couldn't. So the laser thing I always think is funny because it's such a ridiculous contraption, and it's so early in the film. It's the big. A lot of Bond films have these torture moments, but that whole thing works. Right? I love the whole sequence from them pretending to be knocked out asleep, all the soldiers, to all of it, the build up to the operation, and even funnier bits. Like I think Goldfinger kind of has a plan B because the moment they wake up, he's already got like an army general's uniform on.
Yeah,
so he must have had,
and
he must have had a plan B in case something happened. And it's going back to what he says. He'd been working on his plan for 15 years, and I also love the fact that he just locked Oddjob in. Another Bond trope that will pop up is that they will often dispose of the henchmen. And to be fair to Oddjob, it looks like he didn't care, unless he always planned on dying in that safe. I don't really know, but I love the plan, and I think it works. And I think it works for what this film was trying to be as well. It wasn't a plan above the film. It wasn't too smart for an action film. It wasn't too small stakes for an action film. I think they nailed it.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess to sort of take us on to favourite scenes from the film, I guess I've kind of already mentioned mine. I love sort of the back and forth with Bond and Goldfinger, those wisecracks where they're trying to one-up each other. I think that this is easily one of the best Bond films for that aspect. And I guess sort of like going into final thoughts for me is that I do think it definitely feels more blockbuster-ish. It does kind of, you mentioned that there's very few sort of spy scenes in this film. I guess you get the opening scene, which isn't really connected to anything. And that's one of the scant few moments where you actually see Bond being a spy. So I do miss that aspect, and I think going from Russia with Love, which the more I think about it now, I think that's definitely going to be higher up on my ranking. I just like the tone of it, I guess, more so. It is a slow film, but I like the tone of that in terms of the spy aspects of it, probably more so than this one from a question of tone. But then on the flip side, this is just so entertaining. This is just so entertaining, and it just breezes through it. It's easily one of the most memorable. All the aspects that we've talked about, the villain, not so much the Bond girl, but I still do think that the Bond girl that we get in the film is perfectly serviceable for the film itself. The action's fun, the henchmen, the music. This is where it took shape. This is where it became the Bond that we know, what we consider now as what is the formula for a Bond film. So I think for that regard, it has to be respected for the film that it is. It was the change of director as well. I don't know if that contributed to it. And actually, I'll be interested to see now. Like, I know that I love Live and Let Die, and I know that I love Man with the Golden Gun, but I remember hating Diamonds Are Forever. But watching that again, I want to see, because the next film, Thunderball, goes back to the original director from Dr. No and from Russia with Love. And, I know that film is very slow. I don't want to jump straight to that because I need to watch it again. But some of the action sequences in that, it just slows to a crawl again. So I'll be interested to see if Diamonds Are Forever does pick up with this similar kind of pace from this film. But I mean, this film's tremendous. It's got everything you come to expect from Bond. And although it kind of does away from those spy aspects a little bit and does probably become a little bit more, I don't know, mainstream's the right word at this point, but it does feel decidedly different, but it still has that kind of campy tone from the original couple of James Bond films. And it's just a great watch. I wasn't feeling the delay with this film. It just breezed straight through.
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing. I'm going to go to what everyone's bring really quick. His director, sorry. I've got an amazing stat. So you wouldn't believe this, but there are 20. I'm not going to include No Time to Die. There are 24 Bond films, and a grand total of 10 people did them. 9 or 10 people. I can't kind of properly. Then so many of these directors got multiple films, and one thing I'll always give Eon credit for is, I'm not going to say they let them tell a story, but you've had Guy Hamilton, who's obviously in this, and he did a couple of others. We had Terrence Young do some of those other ones as well. Sam Mendes even so recently did 2 in a row, which he really struggled with, and we know via reputation how hard these Bond films are. But I would always hype up Martin Campbell, who directed 2 Bond films, GoldenEye and Casino Royale, which is insane because he directed 2 films and each was the first of each Bond, which is probably really hard for a director to try and do. But the directing side of Bond is a really fascinating discussion within itself. Kind of my final thoughts on this, it's so hard not to just blow smoke up its arse and truth. I know that sounds ridiculous to say, but there's a reason Goldfinger is at the top of a lot of these rankings for theme, for villain, for car, for henchman, for just as a whole, as a film, as a plan. Even the villain's base where he gasses all the other villains is such a villain trope. And I think this is a rightful place at the top of those lists. I'm not going to sit here and say it's my favorite right now. We've still got a ranking video, and I've got 21 more films to change my mind. But Goldfinger sets not a boundary. It sets like the bar of where are you going to get up to? You're always going to be. Is the prime of a Bond going to get compared to this? Because the first Bond outing is now always compared to GoldenEye, Casino Royale. Whereas like this, what is their best Bond film? Take each one, take the best one. But Goldfinger is at the top of that every single day of the week. So I can't do anything but praise this. As I said, from the score, bringing in the Goldfinger theme elements to him on screen, the action moments, the car chases. Yes, Bond doesn't have much to do, but I think when you're 3 films in, what more can you do to develop this guy? Because we know that as simple as that, he's a spy, and as you said earlier, perfectly. He's like a superhero. How are they going to beat Bond? And a lot of films do try and fail to develop him and make him more interesting than what he is, or they reach a point where you can't develop him any further. And I think that's what worked in this film. You couldn't develop Connery's Bond, which is a keyword, Connery's Bond, not necessarily James Bond, more than they already had. And I think this was the smartest thing to do, is just to give him that all-out action film. I think that's what sets the bar for the rest of them to come. That's what makes it have those standards, that it's just phenomenal. I'm going to run out of words to describe how good the film is.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see whereabouts this one stacks up in a future ranking video, because I do genuinely think it's going to be up there. But that'll do it for our discussion on Goldfinger. We will be back next week, same time, same channel. The 11th of May, we will be back with Thunderball, the 1965 film. Wow, they did keep cranking these films out, didn't they? The very following year, we got the next one. That's going to be a very interesting one. Obviously, still sticking with Connery at the moment, and I have mixed things on that film. From what I remember, that could all change next week. Yeah, these have been a blast to do. This was a great one to do today, and I'm kind of loving this. Just personally being able to cross all these off myself, finally getting through the Bond films. We're locked in now with 3 reviews in, so this is here to stay for the majority of the year until No Time to Die. So we're going to breeze through the socials one more time. We are going to throw some other stuff out there as well. It's not all going to be James Bond videos. We will have some other stuff coming to the channel, we promise, guys. But be sure to comment and let us know your thoughts on Goldfinger. How do you think it stacks up against all the other films in the James Bond franchise? Do you think it's as iconic as it deserves to be? Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe as always. You can find us on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, Letterboxd at Cinema_Savvy. At Cinema Savvy, and TeePublic, where we've got this T-shirt, and we've got a whole host of new T-shirts, including the very new nice James Bond one with the logo that you can see at the bottom of the screen. So please check those out if you feel so inclined. That'll do it for our video today, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.